Welcome to Jesus is Mine. I'm Katie.
And I'm Kasey.
This is a space for Gen Z women seeking to live boldly in born-again faith and be the hands and feet of Jesus in all things.
Join us as we navigate identity, purpose, and the everyday challenges of living for Christ in a rapidly changing world.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Jesus is Mine. It's November. And it's cold.
Just don't say the day.
We were laughing before about how I'm always greeting people by the date that we recorded it and the time, and then it gets released on a different day. And it's like, oh, that sounds stupid.
I thought you were about to say the date, and I was like, we just talked about this.
Man. It's so good. But it's like, it's funny. I was talking to somebody else this week about how November always feels like this. It's kind of an odd season because it's both reflective. I feel like November, December is very reflective, kind of reflecting on the year. But it's also, in a lot of ways, at least for me, I find myself wanting to ramp up ahead of all of the new year stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I hate being that person that's like, New Year's resolution on January 1st. And because in some ways, I know myself enough to say, if I start it as a fad like everybody else, then it's not something I'm actually going to follow through on. So for me, it's odd because it's like this reflective season, but also this ramping up of all these exciting new things or new ideas. It's an interesting season. What is it like for you? This probably feels a very different season for you too, in a lot of ways.
November. Yeah. Well, I'm in a very is this even a word? Anticipatory.
Ooh.
Season, because we're in the middle of buying a house, and I don't think we mentioned this on the last podcast, but I'm pregnant and I'm due in February. Yeah. So it's we're in the process of waiting for this house and then waiting for the baby. And so it's kind of weird because it's not the end of the year yet, but I feel things are moving along, and I'm oh, okay. It's I just want to get there now.
Yeah.
So but I'm also really excited for the holidays. I love Thanksgiving, Christmas. I just love those.
And it feels like it goes really fast too, because of the holidays. I'll blink and it'll all be done, and it'll be the beginning of the year anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. Well, it's actually, our topic today is probably pretty perfect with anticipation of the holidays, because Kasey and I, it's funny how we come up with topics. We'll kind of give you a little peek into how we come up with topics. It's very intuitive, probably how it should be, from the Lord. I'll send her an audio message and I'll be like, Kasey, let's do this, and Kasey will be like, that was in my quiet time this morning in my journal. I have this. So we're pretty locked in on what our next topics are.
I have no idea what we're talking about next time.
I know we have no idea. We have no clue. But one of the things that we both have been learning in different ways is where our focus is and how that reflects what we worship, what we love, what matters most to us, the priorities that we have, how that can so easily creep into this idea of materialism. And the Bible has a lot to say about it. And we could probably spend this entire podcast episode just pulling up verses of what the Bible has to say about it.
Mm-hmm.
But we wanted to take a little bit of a different spin on materialism, not so much from the do nots. We'll definitely talk about the do nots of these are things that God has said, don't do this. But more so from the perspective of why does he say, don't focus your energy and your aspirations on materialistic goals and achievements, but also why and what he's replacing that with. And I think something that will tie in so well to our last topic around anxiety is that when we're looking at the things that matter most to us, often that is also a place where our anxiety is. I know that I have felt that many, many, many times, and I can look back and see what I was worshiping most by where my anxiety and my worry was. But the Lord knows that when we love and worship and focus on him, that we are the most fulfilled, satisfied, content we could possibly ever be. Like he knows that that is the model, that is the design. So his do nots are not from a place of like, I want you to be miserable and I want you to be, like I want you to not enjoy the life that I've given you. No, it's like he knows that that's best for us. So we're going to talk about that today and how that is so relevant, not only in this season of the year, but also just in Western culture, in American culture. Everything is very materialistic, especially around this time of year, but in general.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny that you talk about like the whys behind it and like the life behind it. When I was studying for this morning, I wrote down this wasn't like the cornerstone verse that you had brought up before, but John 10:10, it says, "The thief comes only to steal and to kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." I think when we're thinking about the topic of materialism, like you said, it's so easy to get focused on the do nots, but the reason is because Jesus says, like, don't do this, not because like, it's not like this like spirit of like fear or whatever. It's because I want you to have life and I want you to have it abundantly.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
there's a whole bunch of directions we can go with that.
I know. There's so much that I think the other thing that is so beautifully said, even in that verse, Kasey, is the fact that like, if the thing that is most important to us is our identity in Christ, then there is actually nothing for Satan to steal. Because he can't steal us from the Lord. The only things that he can steal are our materialistic objects around us, our houses, our money, our opportunities. He can steal our people, they can die. That's sort of, it feels kind of like a stealing away, even though if they're, if the people around us that we love are saved and they're not gone forever, they're going to heaven and we're here. But it can feel sort of like that robbery of like, oh man, like they got cancer or, something, they got ill, something happened, car accident, whatever that is. But like truly the things that should matter most to us, he can't take them away. And that's actually something that like when I observe my missionary friends, that is probably the most telling thing that I see from them, is that there's this element of boldness and confidence in them that I often don't see in myself and I don't see in my peers that are here in our cozy little homes in the Midwest. You know what I mean? Like they are up against having everything materialistically earthly to lose and still being the most fulfilled and satisfied because their love and their worship is securely held in Christ. There's this level of confidence they have that is so inspiring. And I think that only comes through sanctification and testing and trial and temptation, the things that God uses to bring us closer to him and have a stronger foundation in him. And none of those things can really happen if our treasure is stuff. And I know that sounds trivial. I really don't want that to sound trivial because it feels real. Like the stuff around us, the people we love, the things that we enjoy, the things that we're grateful for to the Lord that he's blessed us with. I think about your new home. I'm so excited for you guys. Like there's all of these beautiful, amazing blessings that God gives us. But if we're worshiping the thing and not the person who gave us the gift, then we miss out on the real blessing there.
Yeah. I think it really comes down to like the spirit versus the flesh. And I keep like when I was thinking about this topic before and then today, like Romans 8, like the whole chapter is just amazing. But like it's so hard. And the reason the Bible gives us these instructions is because it's hard, like, and God knows that we need help with this. But like, it really is a struggle to keep your mind on the spiritual when things in the flesh are all around you. And like things in the flesh don't just mean like, oh, the worst sin of the worst sin. It's like just the everyday things that distract you from, putting your focus on Christ.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
which I think which is something that like a couple of years ago, it hit me so hard. I was like, whenever I read about like the flesh versus the spirit, I thought the flesh was just like, oh, when you do something bad. And so I kind of thought like, well, now that I'm a Christian, like I don't really have to worry about the flesh because, you know, I'm a Christian. And then I started realizing like, oh, there are all these little examples in my life where I'm fighting the flesh, and I didn't realize that that was the terminology for it. And then when I realized that like these tiny things, like not wanting to go perform somewhere, like play piano somewhere because like the one example I can think of when it like hit me really hard was I really didn't want to go play piano for this funeral. Um, I just didn't want to. Not that I didn't love the person, but like it just didn't, you know. Uh,
Was it
but
like the nerves, like the gearing up to play?
I don't know. Well, I didn't know them that well.
Mm,
Um, but it was also nerves, and
mm-hmm,
also like my siblings were going to be singing, so we had to like all
mm.
like practice, and it was the
It's like a
very next
big
day,
commitment.
and I like
Oof. Yeah.
yeah, we had to
Yeah.
like it was like something we had to put together really really quickly, and I wanted to, but I didn't want to. And I was talking about it with Charlie, and I was like, I feel so guilty. I was like, this is something so important, and I really want to do it, but I don't want to do it. And and he was like, oh well, that's, you know, the spirit versus the flesh. And then he was like, are you gonna do it? I was like, yeah. And he was like, well, good for you. He's like, you're letting like the spirit win over the flesh. And I was like, whoa.
I love how he was just like, yeah, yeah, honey, like that's this. Welcome. Thank you, man.
And then
Thank you.
I just like, it really opened my eyes to a lot of the verses in the
Mm.
Bible, where it's like, there's so many things in the Bible that I could be applying to my life that I'm not right now. And that could be encouraging me, just because I didn't realize that like these daily battles are the flesh. Does that make sense?
Yeah, man, that has me think this is the problem with having a fluid conversation because that's sending me in a million, it's so sending me in a million directions. It's so
I feel like
good.
we're already going so off topic.
Oh man, it's so good because I think that like, you know, Kasey and I talked a lot even before we started recording around there's a huge emphasis when we talk about materialism or any of these kinds of terms that are, it's basically a term to represent an idea or like a commandment of sorts that God gives in the Bible. Um, and how oftentimes it's so do not, do not, do not, do not, do not. But then the follow through, the through line of why
Mm-hmm.
is not often there, even though, goodness, the Lord knows, like God knows that we're going to ask that question. We're human beings. He designed us with curiosity, creativity, the desire to explore and understand. He designed us uniquely from all other creation to have an intellect. He knows we're going to ask the why questions. If we're asking it out of rebellion, oh, it's a problem. But if we're asking from a place of, I want to know what you hate and what you love and what you desire so that I can be more like you, he answers those questions. Like he
Mm-hmm.
tells us why we are eventually going to, as believers, as Christians, when we're focusing on all of the materialism, we are distracting ourselves and others from the eternally significant things. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a huge element here is like Satan wins when believers are distracted. He knows
Mm-hmm.
he can't have our soul because it belongs to the Lord, but he can make us ineffective by distracting us with stress, with anxiety, with worry, with a lack of confidence in God, with all of the things in life. He can keep us real busy, you know, hitting this ball and hitting this ball and hitting this ball. And, you know, like he can keep us really busy and distracted because the tendency is to be focused on the earthly because we're human beings, and
Mm-hmm.
that's inevitably going to be a challenge, which is why the Lord talks about it so much. But even how, you know, how Charlie was describing, like, yeah, like that's the battle with the flesh is like, I want to do these things. It's like when Paul talks about like, I do the things that I know I shouldn't do. And I want to do the things that I know I shouldn't do. And I do the things that I, you know, like it's this
Yeah.
game Man, I totally
Exactly.
butchered that, by the way. It's this game between like the flesh, knowing that what I want to do is what I shouldn't do, and what I don't want to do is what I should be doing. And because the Lord knows best, he gives us those commandments.
And what's amazing about the Lord is like, I feel like the whole should and shouldn't thing can really cause a lot of either guilt or um, fear. But like when we think about things that we should do, what's beautiful is that by spending time with the Lord, he can change our hearts to want to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And so like a lot of times it's like, oh, well, I recognize I'm focusing on things that are material, but like I don't really want to go read my Bible or I don't really want to go pray. Like, but the beautiful thing is like if you set time aside and ask the Lord for those things with a very like genuine heart, like he is going to listen to those things. Those are prayers he's going to answer because we know that those are within his will, and he loves to answer prayer that's according to his will. And like what's better than wanting to be close to your father and wanting to be focused on the eternal. But yeah, my mind just went to that when I was thinking about like how I should do these things. And
Yeah. Oh,
just knowing that like
absolutely.
God is on our side. It's not like it's us against the world and we just have to defeat
Even though
Satan.
it feels like that often, it's
It
not.
does. But God is on our side and he is for us and he wants us to succeed against the devil. And we have the power to succeed against the devil because he's on our side.
Yeah. I want to make sure that we could talk about this a million different ways, a million different directions, which is so exciting and also rather frustrating sometimes. There's like, where do we go? I think one of the things that I struggled with a lot, and I still do, I struggle with it less, not because of me, but because of what the Lord has been working on in particular this year. But one of the things that I had struggled a lot with is like, how do I know what I'm worshiping? How do I know what's distracting me from the Lord and what he wants and his plans and the lessons that he's teaching me? How do I know that I'm like open and available and ready for that versus worshiping and focusing on other things? And one of the things, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this. I'll share mine, and then these are like the tips and tricks of the trade. No, not really.
Share all the secrets
Oh man.
because we know everything.
Yeah, right. We're saying that very
That's a joke.
sarcastically, by the way. Yeah. One of the reasons why Kasey and I love doing this is because we're still working on this stuff too, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like we never want this to feel like a conversation that two experts are having, but more so, what is God teaching us? How can that inspire and encourage you? And what is God teaching us all together by being in community with each other? So that's kind of the intent. But when it comes to like noticing where is materialism in my heart, where is there worship of other things, of creation versus creator? One of the things, as I had said earlier in the intro, is anxiety, stress, worry are huge factors of what matters most to me. And there's the kind of anxiety and fear that we can have that's a moment, right? God knows we're going to have those moments. He knows that we're going to have that fear and that uncertainty because we aren't him and we
Mm-hmm.
don't know what the future is going to look like, and we haven't fully made sense of even the past, let alone the present. So there's a lot of the timeline of our life that doesn't fully make sense because we are finite. We are not God. He knows that. Then there's the kind of anxiety and worry that's chronic, right? It's like it's me letting myself spin and worry and get consumed by the worry, which one makes me ineffective, at least at the minimum, less effective for eternally relevant purpose.
Mm-hmm.
But it also hurts my testimony before the Lord and before others, because if I am someone who is stressing and anxious and worried all of the time, how does that communicate with the contrast between me saying God is like the answer to everything and he is my creator and my father and my savior, and also I am debilitatingly anxious and worried about all these things and in need of a constant control of all the things, right? So that has been a huge factor for me, is looking at where is my anxiety, where is my worry, and that's a really good place to see where the priorities are. And if my priorities genuinely are in the Lord, then that anxiety and worry will not manifest the way that it does when I'm worshiping creation. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, like you said, definitely anxiety can still be there.
Yeah.
Um, but it's like, is it overtaking kind of every part of you? And what really getting to the root of like, why, what am I not believing? Or what am I putting all my energy into when that needs to come lower? You know, Christ needs to be our first focus if we truly believe what we say we believe. And a lot of times it's humbling to think like, wow, I'm actually not like living out what I say I believe. And that's where it's like, you know, we're still learning. Like, I'm by no means perfect, and the Lord has, you know, changed me in so many ways, but I'm still growing. But like realizing like, wow, if I really truly believed that um that the Lord is in control, even if this like project with the client is really stressful, like that wouldn't be eating up my whole day, you know? It would be like a problem I have to handle, but like it doesn't have to determine how my week goes, you know? I don't know if that's
Yeah.
clear or not.
Nope. It makes total sense. It's so true. I hope that it's revealing for anyone listening, because I know there's been things that people have shared with me that they thought were insignificant at best. Like, they weren't thinking very big about, oh, I'm going to drop this like truth bomb on you. You know what I mean? Like, people have shared things
Mm-hmm.
with me that have so deeply impacted me and they had no idea it would. And there's things that the Lord has used me to share with others that have really impacted them that I had no idea. So sometimes it's the littlest, simplest ways of looking at who God is and how that can, and ultimately through sanctification should change how we live, how we think, how we want what we want. All of those things start to change as the Holy Spirit is in us, and God is our identity and our anchor and our North Star, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
He is the one that's moving us for His eternal purposes. And that is, y'all, I mean, I've spent so much of my adult life chasing like career identity and entrepreneurship and business and success, all these things that the world was like, this is amazing. And also, there's sort of this deception around the fact that, like, well, God will only use successful people, or God will only use this kind of person. So you've got to put in the work to, you know, be really successful, be really rich, be wealthy, all these things the Lord will use. That can be a deception. Yes, He can use those things, but that is not the qualification for your usefulness. I almost said youthfulness. Your usefulness to the Lord. He uses everyone. He uses even people who don't belong to Him in the sense of like a personal relationship with Him. He still uses them because He
Yeah.
created us and He is the creator of all things. So knowing that and realizing, wow, like I could spend all day long, I could spend my whole life chasing the material. But when I actually lift my gaze to focus on the one who created the material,
Mm.
my whole life starts to change.
Yeah, it reminds me of that phrase. Have you heard it that says, God doesn't, I got to think about it for a second. God doesn't call the equipped, He equips the called.
Yes. Yes. And this goes really well into the whole idea of God's strength being shown in our weakness.
Mm.
This is also a huge thing for us youngsters. You know,
You
age
sound like an
I
old
I
lady saying
know
that.
age is relative. It really is. But like for those of us young women who are like we're young. We're
Mm.
just kind of in the beginning of our adult lives, and we have such an opportunity to use our youthfulness, our energy, our imagination, all for the Lord. And it can feel like we have very little to give, even though we have so much
Mm-hmm.
because of the Lord. And God just amplifies all of that for his purposes. We make him we make God so small when we're so obsessed with the material. We make him so insignificant when we're so obsessed with our identity on earth. And if
Yeah,
only we lifted our eyes up to see how big and incredible and powerful he is, would we then say anything's possible?
right. And that's where I love how you mentioned the creator of the material. Like realizing that he is above all of these things, he created all these things. It's just like it really gives you a good perspective because it's like, whoa, 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 why am I like focusing on this when I have access to something that's so much greater? And he is so much more powerful than what I ask or think. And
Yeah.
it's like obsessing over a like a painting when like trying to learn how to do art from looking at one painting instead of just like if you know the artist, like ask them for help, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Ah, well, and maybe I used this analogy in the last episode, maybe I didn't, but I'll use it again because it's relevant. It's like trying to use a baseball bat to mow the lawn.
No,
It
you didn't
like
use that last time.
okay, well, we're using it today. It's like, I mean, think about how ridiculous that is. Using a baseball
Yeah.
bat to try to mow the lawn. Well, the reason it's ridiculous is because the baseball bat wasn't designed for that function. So if we didn't know anything about baseball, well, where would we go? Well, we'd go to our history books. We'd go to the people who designed the game. We'd go to people who know the game, who've studied the game. They're studying the game because somebody created the game. I think about everything in that sort of context. It's like if I want to know what I'm made for and what success looks like as a creation of God, if I want to know what usefulness really looks like, then I would go to the one who created me. I would go to the one who designed me because he had a particular design in mind. He has there's particular functions. There's it's like a car, you have all of these different functions. You have your cup holders and and if you try to use them for things that they're not meant to be used for, well, problems start to arise. And it's just like us as we have the privilege of not just being a function that the Lord has created, but to actually be the image of God, to have the awareness and the intellect to understand and know Him, to have a personal relationship with Him. That's incredible. That's
Mm.
like that. That's so exciting. And when we're looking to other things to define what our function is, we then get the baseball bat trying to mow the lawn.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when you're mentioning like how it's like a car that's designed to do certain things, I think another big aspect of materialism, which might be a whole different episode, but um, is when you're focused on materialism, I feel like comparison is never very far away.
Yeah, that's so
Um,
true.
and that's where it's like using the whole car example, it's like, well, you might be designed to have super fancy cameras to keep you safe because you are like some kind of safety car. I don't know. I don't know anything about cars.
Wow.
But
We have drifted out of our we have whew.
but if you're focused on material things and you start looking at that other girl who is so good at public speaking or who is so good at like at running her business and you start thinking, man, that's how I should be doing things.
Yeah.
Then you lose your focus of like, Lord, what do you have for me? And you start trying to copy that other girl. Um, and that steals so much joy. And I've struggled so much with comparison. Um, and the Lord has taught me so much about it. So it's like again a
Yeah.
whole different topic. But I think when you're thinking about materialism, comparison is definitely a form of materialism. And it
Absolutely.
shifts your gaze from the Lord and onto other people, and they become kind of your God in a way. because you're just trying to mimic them or be better than them. And or you just don't feel like you can measure up or that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh man. I mean, yes, yes, it is a different topic, but it is someday soon we're gonna have an episode on comparison. But I think it's very relevant for this conversation because these are kind of the symptoms that we
Mm-hmm.
experience from being earthly focused versus eternally focused, which is huge and super important for us to notice because it's sometimes the most helpful ways to understand where we are leaving that corner of our life for ourselves and not giving it to the Lord is by tracking the symptoms, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
where is the resentment? Where is the anger? Oh, I'm filled with rage against this person. Well, whoa, this is like a symptom of something that I'm not giving to the Lord. I'm not repenting to the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trusting him more than my own, well, it should have been this way, right?
Yeah.
And so the contentment piece that is a part of how we are to be in the character of God, how we're commanded to be, because He is everything that we need. That's a
Mm-hmm.
direct contradiction to living a life of comparison, because comparison is like what is it, the antithesis? No, whatever word. It's like the opposite. It's the opposite of contentment.
Yeah.
And that's a huge element. I think we all have stories of ways that that's shown up. I think for me this summer, I hope this share is encouraging to someone. I was looking for a job all summer long and I kept being like, okay, God, you've got me in the hallway. When is the door going to open? When is the door going to open? And in the beginning of the summer, I could tell that I was struggling with discontentment, feeling sort of frustrated, like angsty. God, where are you? Come on, what are you doing? What are you up to? He had so much to teach me in the hallway, though. And what's cool, even the lessons weren't just for me either.
Mm-hmm.
Like the time that I have had, the availability that I've had, he has used those to serve and bless and give to others. And I think this comes kind of full circle back to the materialistic idea, which is like it's the premise of life isn't for us. And
Mm-hmm.
that is a huge contradiction again to materialism because everything about worshiping and obsessing and loving money and resources here on earth and making those our God, that is about us. That makes us the center of our little universe. Life isn't for us. We're being used by God to further his gospel, to further the message of his love and his gift of salvation to others. We're here to glorify him, to bring the glory back to God. And
Mm-hmm.
all of that is inevitably a gift and a blessing for everyone that he is reaching through us. And that isn't about us. And if we could only see the blessing in that and see the perspective that is so eternally purposeful in that, oh, our life would be drastically different. What we invest in would be different. What we worry about would be different. What we struggle with would be different when we had an eternally mission oriented perspective of life.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because like the greatest commandments are love God and love others.
Yeah.
It's not be happy.
Yeah.
But the cool
Well,
thing is by loving God and by loving others, you reach fullness of joy.
yeah.
Like it's there's that one psalm, I forget which one it is, but it ends with in his presence is fullness of joy.
Mm,
And so it's like ultimately it will lead to your happiness, but chasing after your own happiness is not the first thing that we should be doing.
yeah. It's so counterintuitive to our little finite brains, which is
Yeah.
why the Lord knows that we ultimately have to have faith in him and trust him because it doesn't totally make sense, especially early on in our walks with the Lord. But what I think is so incredible, it's something that I've spent a lot of time on this week is this little verse at the end of First Corinthians chapter 2 that literally says, Paul's talking about how we're not doing things in our own power. We're not coming to you, the churches, and we're not in our greatness of speech. And this is the Lord's message, the Lord's work through us for you. And then he talks about how the earthly wisdom of man is foolishness to God, and how if we're focusing on that, then we're inevitably leading ourselves and others astray. But then at the very end is a verse that we do not talk enough about, which basically says, "But we have the mind of Christ," and it's not, "But we're getting the mind of Christ," or "God's working on us and He's putting that in there." No, it's a statement. We have the mind of Christ, and I think that we put God in a box, even in our own lives and our own sanctification process. Like, the Holy Spirit is in us, working, leading our eyes to where they should be, leading our worship and our focus to where it should be. And the thing that gets in the way is when we take our focus off of and try to build our own level of control, our own dynasty, our own universe, our own all of those things. It's when we pull back and say, I'm not totally sure. I'm not totally believing that God is true. And that comes ultimately back to his character and the identity that he gives to us. It's a huge element. It always comes back to identity. I think I said that before. It's like, this is a premise. This is like a theme. This will be a theme of our podcast episodes. It always comes back to identity.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of the verse that says, draw near to God and he will draw near to you. Yeah. It's like, he's not far away.
No.
He's right there. It's us who keep kind of going back and forth.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Ah. What a conversation. This could have easily been 3 hours long, but we
look at us go.
Are very kind and gracious to all of you listening. Well, if you have not listened to any of the previous episodes, they'll be here on the screen somewhere, so you can go back and listen to some of the previous episodes. But I hope that this conversation was encouraging to those of you listening, and that it strikes a chord that God uses our words, finite as they are, to show you where he is working in your life, to encourage you that you are not alone, that he is always near to you, and to also help you see what's the next lesson, what's the next place to work at, what's the areas of your life that are kind of over there in the corner not being given to the Lord, and what could happen when you actually allow 100% of your life to be dedicated to the Lord, because he created it and designed it for that purpose. And that is ultimately the highest level of purpose and peace and contentment that we could have, giving everything that we have to the Lord.
Yeah, definitely.